I proposed to my girlfriend, then her ex showed up and said they're still married. My name is Ethan, and I'm 29 years old. For the last 2 years, I thought I was living the kind of life they write romantic comedies about. I was in love with the most incredible woman I had ever met, a woman named Clara. She was everything. She was brilliant, with a sharp wit that could cut through any awkward silence, and a laugh that felt like sunshine. She was beautiful, not in a generic supermodel way, but in a way that was uniquely and captivating her. She had these deep, thoughtful eyes that seemed to see right into your soul, and a smile that could make me forget my own name. We met at a friend's art gallery opening, a night I had almost skipped because I was tired from work. Thank God I went. We talked for 3 hours straight about everything from obscure 80s movies to the theoretical physics of black holes. I knew right then and there that she was it for me. Our relationship was a whirlwind of perfect moments. Lazy Sunday mornings spent cooking pancakes, road trips with no destination in mind, nights spent talking until the sun came up. She fit into my life like she was always meant to be there. She got along with my friends, charmed my parents, and understood my ambitions in a way no one ever had. She was my partner, my best friend, my future. So it was only natural that I started thinking about proposing. I spent months planning it. I wanted it to be perfect, a story she could tell our grandchildren one day. I found the ring, a vintage-style diamond band that I knew she would love the moment she saw it. I booked a table at La Lune, the most exclusive, most romantic restaurant in the city. It was the kind of place with dim lighting, crisp white tablecloths, and a violinist playing softly in the corner. It was the perfect setting for the perfect moment. The night of the proposal, I was a nervous wreck. My palms were sweating and my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I had the ring box burning a hole in my pocket. Clara looked breathtaking. She wore a deep red dress that matched the color of the wine we ordered, and every time she looked at me and smiled, my resolve wavered. I was so terrified of messing it up. But as the night went on and the conversation flowed as easily as it always did, my nerves started to settle. This was right. This was us. After dessert, when the violinist began to play her favorite song, I knew it was time. I took a deep breath, stood up, and dropped to one knee. A few nearby patrons gasped and turned to watch. I pulled out the velvet box, opened it, and looked up into her face. Her eyes were wide and her hands flew to her mouth. Tears started to well in her eyes, but they were happy tears, I could tell. I saw my entire future reflected in them. I started to speak, my voice trembling slightly as I poured my heart out, telling her how much she meant to me, how I couldn't imagine my life without her. I asked the question, the one that would change everything. And just as her lips parted to give me the answer I was so desperately waiting for, a sharp voice cut through the romantic haze of the restaurant, shouting a name that wasn't mine, a name I had never heard before. Every head in the restaurant swiveled towards the entrance. Standing there, framed in the ornate doorway, was a man. He was in his early 30s maybe, with a look of sheer desperation etched onto his face. His hair was a mess, his clothes were wrinkled, as if he'd been running or maybe hadn't slept in days. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving, and his eyes were scanning the room wildly, searching for something, or someone. The maitre d' rushed towards him, holding his hands up in a gesture of calm, but the man brushed past him without a second glance. His eyes had locked onto our table, onto Clara. The look on her face in that moment is something that will be burned into my memory forever. The joy, the love, the happiness, it all evaporated in an instant. It was like watching a beautiful painting being doused in acid. The color drained from her face, leaving it a pale, waxy mask. The happy tears in her eyes turned to something else, something that looked like pure, undiluted terror. Her body went rigid and she shrunk back in her chair, as if she could make herself disappear. The man started walking towards us, his steps quick and determined. He didn't look angry, not in a shouting or aggressive way. He looked resolved, as if he were a man on a mission, a man who had been searching for a very long time and had finally reached his destination. The restaurant was dead silent now, the violinist having stopped mid-note. All the romantic ambiance had been shattered, replaced by a thick, suffocating tension. I was still on one knee, the ring box held open in my hand, feeling like a complete and utter fool. My mind was racing, trying to catch up. Who was this guy? A disgruntled ex? A jealous relative? Clara's reaction was so extreme, so visceral, that it couldn't be something simple. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. I started to stand up, my confusion turning into a protective anger. Who was this person to ruin the most important moment of my life? As he got closer, I could see the details of his face more clearly. He had kind eyes, but they were filled with a deep, profound sadness. He stopped a few feet from our table, his gaze fixed solely on Clara. He didn't even look at me, kneeling there like an idiot. He held up his left hand, and for the first time, I noticed the plain gold band on his ring finger. It was a simple, unassuming ring, but it might as well have been a flashing neon sign. Clara let out a small, choked sound, a whimper of pure panic. She was shaking her head almost imperceptibly, her eyes pleading with him. He then reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. He flipped it open and held it out, not to me, but to the room at large. It was his driver's license. And next to it, tucked into a clear plastic sleeve, was a wedding photo. It was him and Clara. She was wearing a white dress, and he was in a tux. They were smiling, looking deliriously happy. And on the back of the photo, written in elegant script, was a date, 5 years ago. The man then looked directly at me, his expression a mixture of pity and grim determination. He didn't have to say a word. The accusation, the truth, it was all there in his eyes and in that single, devastating photograph. The world seemed to slow down, each second stretching into an eternity. The restaurant, which had been a backdrop for my perfect proposal, was now a stage for my public humiliation. I could feel the eyes of every single patron on me, a mixture of pity, curiosity, and morbid fascination. My gaze was locked on the photograph in the man's hand. It was undeniably Clara. Her smile, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners, it was the same smile she had given me just minutes ago. But the man next to her wasn't me. My brain was struggling to process the information, to connect the woman I loved, the woman I was about to marry, to this stranger and this 5-year-old wedding photo. It felt like I was looking at a picture of a doppelganger, a cruel trick. But the look on Clara's face told me it was no trick, it was real. She was trapped, her eyes darting between me and the man, her mind clearly racing for an escape, an explanation, anything that could undo the damage that had been done. I finally pushed myself up from my knee, my joints stiff. The ring box felt impossibly heavy in my hand. I looked at Clara, my eyes begging her to deny it, to tell me this was all a misunderstanding, a case of mistaken identity, a sick joke. I needed her to say something, anything, but she just sat there, mute and trembling, her face ashen. Her silence was more damning than any confession could have been. The man, her supposed husband, took a step closer. He still hadn't raised his voice. He spoke, his voice quiet, but carrying a weight that crushed the air out of the room. I couldn't make out the exact words from where I stood, but I saw their effect on Clara. She flinched as if he had struck her. He gestured to her, then to me, then back to the photo. His narrative was clear, even without sound. This is my wife. We are married. You are a part of her lie. The manager of the restaurant finally arrived, his face a mask of professional concern. He tried to intervene, placing a hand on the man's shoulder, but the man shrugged him off with a quiet intensity that was more intimidating than any outburst would have been. Security guards began to converge on the table, their presence a low, menacing hum. The man held up his hands, not in surrender, but as a sign that he wasn't a threat. His mission, it seemed, was complete. He had found her. He had exposed her. He then did something that sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. He looked at me, then back at Clara, and he shook his head slowly. He mouthed a single word, a name that wasn't Clara. Then he pointed to himself and then to her and made a circling motion with his finger. He wasn't just claiming to be her husband, he was implying this was a pattern, a cycle, that he wasn't the first and I probably wouldn't be the last. The implication was so vast, so horrifying, that my mind recoiled from it. This wasn't just a case of a woman with a secret past, this was something else entirely, something calculated and predatory. As the guards gently but firmly escorted him from the restaurant, he looked back one last time, his eyes filled not with anger, but with a deep, weary sorrow that I, in that moment, was beginning to understand all too well. The restaurant erupted in a flurry of hushed whispers as the man was led away. The spell was broken. Clara remained frozen in her chair, a statue carved from fear and shame. I stood there, the ring box still clutched in my hand, feeling like an actor who had forgotten his lines in a play I no longer recognized. The manager approached our table, his expression one of profound awkwardness. He asked if we were all right, a question so ludicrous it almost made me laugh. I just shook my head, my eyes never leaving Clara. I needed answers. I needed to understand. But looking at her,
I realized I wasn't going to get them from her. Not here, not now. She was a cornered animal, and her only instinct was survival. She finally moved, pushing her chair back with a scraping sound that made everyone jump. She stood up on shaky legs, avoiding my gaze. She grabbed her purse from the back of the chair and mumbled something that sounded like an apology, but it was hollow, meaningless. She turned and fled, walking quickly towards the exit, not running, but with a purposeful stride that said she was escaping. I let her go. What was I supposed to do? Chase her? Drag her back and demand an explanation in front of an audience? No. The shock was too deep, the betrayal too raw. I was left alone at the table, the centerpiece of a drama I hadn't known I was in. The untouched dessert, the half-empty glasses of wine, the velvet ring box in my hand, it all felt like props from a life that wasn't mine. I paid the bill, my hands trembling so much I could barely sign the receipt. I left a massive tip, an apology to the staff for the scene I had unwittingly caused. The drive home was a blur. The city lights streaked past my window, a kaleidoscope of color that meant nothing. Our apartment, the place that had been my sanctuary, now felt like a crime scene. Every object, every piece of furniture was tainted with her lie. The picture of us on the mantelpiece, the coffee mug she always used, the silly throw pillows she had picked out, they were all artifacts of a fiction. I felt like a ghost haunting my own home. I couldn't stay. I began to pace, my mind replaying the scene at the restaurant over and over again. The man's face, Clara's terror, the wedding photo. I needed to know more. I needed to find proof, something concrete that could explain the impossible. Driven by a desperate, gnawing need for the truth, I started going through her things. It felt like a violation, a trespass on the privacy of the woman I loved. But the woman I loved was a phantom, a mirage. The real person, the one who had been living with me for 2 years, was a stranger. I started in her closet, then her desk drawers. Everything was normal, too normal. It was as if she had curated her life to be perfectly believable. Then I remembered the small fireproof box she kept in the back of her closet. She had told me it held sentimental things from her childhood, old photos and keepsakes. She had never opened it in front of me. I found it tucked behind a stack of shoeboxes. It was heavy. It was locked. I spent the next 20 minutes searching for the key, my frustration mounting with every passing second. Finally, I found it taped to the underside of a drawer in her nightstand, a hiding place so cliché it was almost insulting. My hands were slick with sweat as I turned the key in the lock. The lid swung open. Inside, there were no childhood photos, there were no sentimental keepsakes. There were 3 passports, each with her picture, but each bearing a different name. And next to them were 2 driver's licenses, again with her face, but with 2 more different names. Tucked into a side pocket was a small black flash drive. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a woman with a secret past. This was a professional. The flash drive felt like a live grenade in my hand. I carried it to my laptop, my heart pounding with a dread that was far heavier than the nervousness I had felt earlier that night. I hesitated for a long moment, my finger hovering over the USB port. Did I really want to do this? Did I want to pull back the curtain and see the full, ugly extent of the deception? Part of me wanted to smash the laptop, throw the flash drive into the river, and pretend none of this ever happened. But I knew I couldn't. I needed to know. I needed to see the monster for what it was. I slid the drive into the port. The computer whirred for a second, and a File Explorer window popped up. The drive was neatly organized, a testament to her meticulous, horrifying efficiency. There were several folders on the main drive, each labeled with a major U.S. city: Chicago, Miami, Denver, Seattle. And then, the one that made my stomach drop?
A folder labeled with the name of our city. With a sense of grim resolve, I clicked on the folder for Chicago first. It opened to reveal a trove of digital evidence. There were dozens of photos of her, smiling and happy, with a man I didn't know. They were at the beach, at a baseball game, at a fancy dinner. They looked like a normal, happy couple. There were scanned documents, a lease agreement for an apartment with both their names on it, a joint bank account statement, and, most chillingly of all, a scanned marriage certificate. Her name on the certificate was one of the aliases from the passports. I felt sick. I closed the folder and opened the one for Miami. Same story. Different man, different city, different name, but the same pattern of fabricated life. There were photos, documents, and even a few journal entries typed out detailing her feelings for the man in that city. It was a performance, a meticulously crafted role. I realized then that she wasn't just a con artist after money. She was a vampire, feeding on love and trust. She got a thrill from building an entire world with someone, only to tear it all down and disappear without a trace. Finally, my trembling finger clicked on the folder for our city, for us. Inside, I saw my life laid bare through her eyes. There were photos of me she had taken when I wasn't looking, sleeping, working at my desk, laughing with my friends. There were scanned copies of my pay stubs, my bank statements. There was a detailed document, a profile of me, my habits, my family history, my weaknesses. She had noted that I was eager for commitment, financially stable, and lonely after a past breakup. I was a target. I was a mark. The cold, clinical nature of it all was more painful than any emotional outburst could have been. She had studied me, learned my every desire and fear, and had molded herself into the perfect woman for me. It was a business transaction, and the currency was my heart. I slumped back in my chair, the weight of it all crushing me. I was just another folder on a flash drive, another victim in a long line of them. As I sat there, staring at the screen in a state of shock, my phone buzzed on the desk. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something, a sliver of desperate curiosity, made me answer. A voice, grim and familiar, came through the speaker. It was the man from the restaurant. He told me he had been looking for her for 2 years. He told me he knew I wasn't the first. And then he said the words that would change the course of everything. I'm not the only one she's done this to. We need to talk. The man from the restaurant, whose name I learned was Daniel, suggested we meet in a neutral, public place, a coffee shop across town. I was hesitant, but I was also desperate. He was the only other person in the world who understood what I was going through. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting in a corner booth, looking as weary as he had in the restaurant. He was nursing a black coffee, his eyes scanning the room with a cautious energy. I slid into the booth opposite him, and for a moment we just sat in silence, two strangers bound by a shared, unimaginable betrayal. He didn't waste any time. He told me his story. It was a carbon copy of the pattern I had seen on the flash drive, but hearing it from a real person, seeing the pain in his eyes, made it infinitely more real. They had been married for 5 years. He had loved her, built a life with her. He had come home from a week-long business trip to find their apartment cleaned out, their joint bank account emptied, and her gone, vanished. He had spent the last 2 years and a small fortune trying to find her, following a trail of cold leads and dead ends.
The restaurant was a pure fluke. A friend had seen my social media post about the proposal and tagged him, thinking the woman looked familiar. Daniel then told me he wasn't alone. Through his own investigation, he had managed to track down 2 other men. He pulled out his laptop and opened a video chat. 2 faces appeared on the screen, men from different parts of the country, both wearing the same haunted expression I knew was on my own face. There was Ben, a software developer from Chicago, and Tom, a lawyer from Miami. As we talked, the horrifying scope of Clara's deception began to unfold. We were her last 3 projects. We compared notes, our stories overlapping with eerie precision. The way she met us, the hobbies she pretended to like, the intimate details she learned about our lives to make us feel seen and understood. She was a chameleon, a master of emotional manipulation. We built a timeline, a map of her path of destruction across the United States, a 5-year-long crime spree of the heart. We realized she targeted men who were successful, emotionally open, and ready to settle down. She would infiltrate their lives, play the part of the perfect partner for a year or 2, and then, once she had exhausted their resources or simply grown bored with the role, she would wipe herself clean and move on to the next city, the next victim. The question of why she did it hung in the air. It wasn't just about the money. The amounts she took, while significant, weren't life-changing. We came to the chilling conclusion that she did it for the thrill, for the power. She was a collector of hearts, and we were just trophies in her collection. Going to the police seemed pointless. How could we explain it? My girlfriend, who I now know by at least 5 different names, conned me, and she's also married to this other guy under a different name, and she did the same thing to these guys online. It sounded like the plot of a bad movie. We had no legal recourse. She had covered her tracks too well. So we decided to take matters into our own hands. We weren't looking for revenge, not in a violent way. We were looking for justice. We wanted to expose her, to stop her from doing this to anyone else. Daniel revealed that he had been working with a private investigator, tracking her digital footprint. And they had found her. He had a lead. He knew where she was, and, most terrifyingly, he had a pretty good idea who her next target was. He had a plan, and he needed my help to see it through. Daniel's plan was not one of confrontation, but of quiet, strategic intervention. The private investigator had tracked Clara to a luxury resort in Napa Valley. She was there with a new target, a wealthy tech CEO in his late 40s who, according to his public social media profile, was recently divorced and ready to find his forever person. The predictability of it was sickening. She was following her script to the letter. Our plan was simple. We would not be the jilted lovers crashing the party. We would be the architects of her downfall. Daniel, as her only legal husband, had spent the last few days compiling all the evidence we had gathered, the flash drive, our sworn testimonies, the marriage certificates, the financial records. He had presented it all to a contact he had in the local sheriff's department, a man who owed him a favor. The evidence, while circumstantial regarding specific crimes, was enough to raise serious questions and warrant an investigation, especially given the pattern of interstate fraud. The police agreed to help, but they wanted to catch her in the act, to establish her current identity and her connection to her new victim. The 4 of us, Daniel, Ben, Tom, and I, drove to Napa. It felt strange, being part of this coalition of the brokenhearted, a brotherhood forged in betrayal. We didn't talk much on the drive. We didn't need to. We all knew what we were there to do. We checked into a modest motel a few miles from the resort and waited for Daniel's call. It came the next afternoon. The PI had spotted them at a high-end winery known for its exclusive tasting events. This was our chance. We drove to the winery, our nerves taut with anticipation. We didn't go inside. We watched from a distance, across the vineyard, binoculars trained on the outdoor patio. And then we saw her. She was laughing, her head thrown back, her hand resting on the arm of her new mark. She looked radiant, happy, completely unbothered. There was no sign of guilt, no shadow of the lives she had ruined. She was a predator, fully in her element, and the sight of it was the most chilling thing I had ever witnessed. She was a ghost, and we were about to make her solid. We gave the signal to the local law enforcement. We watched as two uniformed officers walked calmly across the patio and approached their table. The new target looked up, confused. Clara's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes, as if they were merely an inconvenience. But then the officers spoke to her, their expressions serious. They showed her a piece of paper, a warrant. The mask finally, completely slipped. The color drained from her face, the same way it had in the restaurant. The confident, radiant woman vanished, replaced by a trapped, cornered animal. Her eyes darted around, looking for an escape that wasn't there. The man she was with looked from her to the officers, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror as he started to understand. We watched, silent and unseen, as they led her away, her hands cuffed behind her back. There was no shouting, no dramatic scene. It was quiet, methodical, and utterly final. There was no feeling of victory, only a profound and somber relief. In the weeks that followed, I sold the ring, went to therapy, and began the slow, painful process of rebuilding my life. I was left with scars, but also with a strange, hard-won wisdom. I learned that love, in its purest form, requires a vulnerability that can be exploited. But that doesn't mean you should stop looking for it. You just have to look a little more carefully. And I was left with the quiet, unbreakable bond with the other men she had deceived, the only other people in the world who truly knew the cost of a perfect lie.